What if peace isn't stolen, but leaked, one quiet compromise at a time? Not with war, not with chaos, but with every smile you force, every message you reply to out of guilt, every time you say yes when your soul quietly begged for no. The erosion doesn't scream, it seeps through tiny permissions, through emotional detours disguised as kindness, until one day you're exhausted, and not from doing too much, but from never drawing the line that should have protected your stillness. You start wondering why you feel invaded in conversations you never wanted to enter, why you leave rooms heavier, not louder, and why the cost of your peace is paid, not in arguments, but in silent agreements you never consciously made. That's the trap, because in a world that worships access, the one who withholds is seen as cold. But what if withholding isn't cruelty? It's clarity. What if being unreadable is not avoidance, but a boundary too solid to decode? The Stoics understood this long before the digital age ever demanded instant replies and emotional availability on tap. They didn't set boundaries with slogans or rage. They did it with stillness, with presence, with the discipline of saying less and meaning more. Because they knew peace isn't something you ask for, it's something you enforce, calmly, consistently, invisibly. So today we begin not by reacting to the chaos outside, but by reconfiguring the architecture within. The blueprint isn't rigid, but it is sovereign. In this episode, we'll explore the 9 invisible lines Stoics use to stay grounded in a noisy world. Boundaries drawn not to shut people out, but to stay anchored within. Not to control others, but to govern access. Because not everyone deserves front row seats to your inner clarity. And when you finally realize that, silence stops being surrender. It becomes sovereignty. You weren't always this exhausted. There was a time when you spoke with presence, clear, steady, whole. But somewhere between your kindness and their discomfort, you started shrinking. You began editing your words before they reached the air. You clarified things no one questioned. You smiled when you wanted silence. And each time you softened a truth to maintain harmony, something inside you went quiet, not in peace, but in erasure. You didn't lose yourself overnight. It happened slowly, through subtle moments. A reply you didn't owe, an apology for a tone you never raised, a conversation you didn't want, but entered out of guilt. And over time, your boundaries faded, not by force, but by your own hands, hoping to be understood in places that only needed you to be available. This is the currency of the modern world, constant access disguised as connection. You're expected to reply instantly, explain endlessly, perform gently, and if you don't, you're called cold, distant, difficult. But here's what the Stoics knew, long before overwhelm became a trend. When everyone has access, no one values presence. Peace demands a boundary, stillness demands a gate, and clarity begins where permission ends. The erosion didn't begin with chaos, it began with kindness misplaced. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, never regard something as doing you good if it makes you betray a trust, or lose your sense of shame, or makes you hate, suspect, or curse someone. But betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that says yes when your soul meant no. Today you stop whispering, not by raising your voice, but by raising your standards. Because not everyone who speaks to you deserves a full response. Not everyone who reaches out is entitled to reach in. And your peace doesn't need to be defended with noise. It needs to be protected with structure. Not walls, but boundaries. Invisible, intentional, inviolable. And in the next few minutes, we'll rebuild them, one line at a time. They say silence is golden, but only when it's chosen, not stolen. In a world that pressures you to reply, explain, and respond at the speed of a swipe, the first boundary of a Stoic is not loud. It's not visible. It's simply this: the right to pause. The silent wall is not a rejection, it's an assertion. A subtle, deliberate refusal to let urgency dictate presence. This boundary doesn't shout no. It simply doesn't rush to say yes. You feel it when someone texts you and waits, and waits, and wonders why you haven't responded yet. You feel it when someone asks for your thoughts immediately and interprets stillness as disrespect. But what they don't realize is that your silence isn't absence. It's assessment. It's the stillness where clarity breathes. It's the pause between trigger and truth. And without it, you're not responding. You're reacting. The modern world treats immediacy like virtue. Delayed response is seen as avoidance, but the Stoic knows better. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." The silent wall gives you back that power. It reminds you, just because something feels urgent doesn't mean it deserves your energy now. You are not a notification system. You are a sovereign being, and your clarity requires rhythm, not reaction. The trap, however, is emotional guilt. You'll be told you're distant, aloof, passive-aggressive. But withholding is not a weapon when it's rooted in discernment. You are not avoiding them. You are honoring you. Because when you answer too quickly, you lose the space to interpret, to observe, to choose your tone with care. And that's how misunderstandings multiply, when presence is sacrificed on the altar of speed. The Stoic response? You don't explain the pause. You live in it. You don't defend your timing. You refine it. You don't offer apologies for not being instantly accessible, because access in itself is a privilege, and privileges can be revoked when misused. The silent wall is not silence for silence's sake. It's the quiet restructuring of your mental boundaries. And once it's built, you'll realize peace was never about volume. It was about timing. The most powerful sentence you'll ever speak might begin with a pause, a long, quiet, sovereign pause. Some truths only need to be said once. When spoken clearly, they don't require echo, they require courage. That's the essence of the second Stoic boundary, the one reply rule. In a culture where repetition is mistaken for care and over-explanation is sold as empathy, the ability to speak once and stand by it is radical. You've likely felt the pull. You tell someone how you feel, you draw a line, you express a boundary. And instead of being met with respect, you're met with questions. Not the curious kind, but the circular, exhausting kind. They say, I just want to understand, but what they truly want is for you to doubt yourself, to reshape your truth into something softer, more convenient. So you clarify, then clarify again, until eventually what was once your boundary has become their narrative, and you find yourself defending something that was never up for negotiation. But Stoic philosophy offers a different model. Epictetus wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That's the one reply rule. You don't argue, you don't persuade, you don't edit your soul for someone else's comprehension. You speak once, with precision, with stillness, with sovereignty. And then you stop, not from stubbornness, but from self-respect. Because the moment you explain more than once, you signal doubt. And doubt in the wrong hands becomes a lever for control. This rule isn't about silence, it's about signal. You're signaling to yourself that your truth doesn't need applause to be valid. You're signaling to others that your presence isn't a rehearsal space for their approval. And most of all, you're protecting your energy from conversations that don't seek connection. They seek compliance. The one reply rule is a boundary not of tone, but of time. It reclaims hours you used to spend justifying your decency to people addicted to distortion. Yes, they may call you cold, distant, unwilling to compromise, let them. Because when your boundary is received as arrogance, it usually means it's working. You were never meant to convince the unwilling. You were meant to conserve your clarity. And sometimes the most profound thing you can say is nothing after saying everything once. You only have so much to give, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And yet, without boundaries, your energy becomes public property. That's where the third Stoic boundary begins, the emotional bandwidth filter. Not everyone who wants your attention deserves it. Not everyone who vents to you is seeking clarity. Some are offloading their confusion like a virus, looking for a host. And if you're not careful, you become that host, absorbing their chaos, decoding their subtext, managing their moods while neglecting your own. Suddenly you're drained, not because life is heavy, but because your filter was wide open to noise disguised as connection. This is the modern parasite, emotional bandwidth theft. It's not always malicious. Often it arrives wrapped in sympathy, urgency, or familiarity. But the cost is real. You find yourself thinking about their problem long after the call ends. You replay their pain. You try to solve what they never asked you to fix. And little by little, your peace bleeds out, not through conflict, but through proximity. That's the silent tax of access. And the Stoics knew, when you carry what isn't yours, you weaken your ability to carry what is. Seneca warned, associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is a mutual one. That's the filter, mutuality, reciprocity, alignment. Not everyone is toxic, but not everyone is nourishing either. And discernment is not judgment, it's protection. A Stoic doesn't give out emotional labor like it's candy. They allocate it like currency, deliberately, consciously, with awareness of what it costs. The emotional bandwidth filter doesn't require drama. It requires distance, strategic distance. You shorten calls that turn into confession booths. You delay replies that only lead to loops. You preserve your attention for people who respect the weight of it. Because presence is not infinite, it is sacred. And when you waste it on the unfiltered, you lose it for the intentional. Boundaries aren't just about what you reject, they're about what you reserve. And your emotional bandwidth deserves to be reserved for the rare few who listen when you speak, give when you pause, and never confuse your stillness with availability. There's a subtle kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from effort, but from performance. The fourth Stoic boundary exists to end that, the no performance zone. It's the sacred space where you stop curating, stop rehearsing, stop adjusting yourself to fit into someone else's comfort. Because not every conversation is a stage, and you are not an actor hired to keep the emotional lighting soft for everyone else. The no performance zone is a quiet refusal to shrink. It's the boundary where you stop translating your truth into palatable fragments just to avoid tension. And if that makes the room uncomfortable, so be it. Because what's the cost of comfort if it requires your erasure? You've felt this boundary being breached when you smile while you're unraveling, when you nod to keep the peace, even as your spirit is folding in silence, when your sentences become scripts and your warmth becomes a costume. You know this zone has vanished when presence feels like pretending. And the worst part? The more you perform for love, the less you trust that love when it shows up. Because it didn't meet you, it met your mask. The Stoics weren't performers, they were presences. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Never be caught without something constructive to do, not superficial show, but real substance." Substance doesn't act, it simply is. That's why the no performance zone isn't dramatic. It's steady. It's the decision to speak in your real voice, without background music or applause. It's the freedom to say, "I'm not okay," without fearing abandonment. It's the quiet boldness to exist fully, not flatter selectively. In a world that rewards polish and punishes honesty, this boundary can feel dangerous. But it's not danger, it's detox. Because every time you perform, you reinforce the belief that the real you is too much, too blunt, too messy, and over time your identity becomes a script with no author. But a Stoic reclaims the pen. They write their presence, not to impress, but to express. They do not offer performance, they offer alignment. And if that scares the room was never safe. The no performance zone doesn't require explanation. It requires embodiment. You show up unmasked. You speak without disclaimers. You refuse to twist your truth into a mood-calming melody. And if someone walks away because you stop performing, let them. You didn't lose them. You lost the weight of their expectation. And in that absence, you'll find something better than applause: peace. There's a moment in every relationship, subtle, quiet, when you realize you can't be fully honest without walking on shards. That's when the fifth Stoic boundary must rise: the mirror audit. It's the internal check you run before giving someone access to your unfiltered truth. Ask yourself, can I be real in this space without managing their reaction? If the answer is no, that's not a connection. That's a performance contract. Because where you cannot be authentic, you are not seen, you are translated. And every translation is a distortion. The mirror audit is not about judging others, it's about protecting your reflection. Some people don't see you, they see their version of you. They don't hear your words, they filter them through their wounds. And when you show up with presence, they flinch as if you brought fire. So you begin to dim. You soften edges. You round your voice. You hide the heat of your truth in passive phrasing. Not out of kindness, but out of emotional self-preservation. And that's the fracture. When you're afraid to be real, you start living inside someone else's comfort zone. Until one day, your voice feels foreign, even to you. The Stoics would call this a misplacement of self. As Epictetus reminds us, know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly. If someone can't sit with the unadorned you, if they only stay for the edited version, you're not in a relationship, you're in a mirror, and you're the one cracking every time you try to exist with weight. That's why the mirror audit isn't cruel. It's clarity. You assess the space. You read the emotional bandwidth. And if the reflection is warped, you stop giving it your light. Because here's the truth. You don't need to be palatable to be powerful. You don't need to shrink your soul into bite-sized sentences just to avoid making someone flinch. You need to speak in a frequency that doesn't require translation. And the only people who can hear it are the ones who aren't afraid of your unpolished presence. The mirror audit is simple. You ask yourself one thing: can I exist at full volume here? If the answer is no, you recalibrate, not with aggression, but with grace. You reduce exposure. You increase inner anchoring. You stop trying to fix a mirror that only ever wanted a reflection, not a relationship. Because a Stoic doesn't perform in places that distort. They preserve their truth in places that honor it. And sometimes the strongest boundary isn't what you say, it's where you stop showing up. Clarity is not a gift you owe twice. That's the heart of the sixth Stoic boundary, the circle rule. It's the discipline of recognizing when a conversation isn't a dialogue, it's a loop. You spoke your truth, you shared your reasoning, you drew the line with care, but they keep circling back, reframing, repeating, pretending not to hear what they fully understood. And suddenly, your clarity is under trial. Not because it wasn't clear, but because they hope if they ask enough times, you'll soften it. That's not communication, that's erosion. And every time you re-enter that circle, you bleed just a little more of your certainty away. The circle rule is the refusal to become a spokesperson for your boundaries. You said it once, and that was enough. Repetition does not add value, It removes conviction. The more you explain, the more you teach them that your truth is flexible, your stance negotiable. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Translation: stop explaining your alignment to those who profit from your confusion. Because the people who keep circling aren't always malicious. Sometimes they're just addicted to the feeling of emotional access. They don't want clarity, they want proximity to your attention. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse persistence for sincerity. You'll think, maybe they really didn't get it. But they did. They just didn't like it. And their repetition is not confusion. It's a strategy. The Stoic response is not silence. It's exit. You disengage. You stop being the teacher in a classroom that refuses to learn. You stop debating boundaries with people who pretend the chalkboard is still blank. You stop being the echo to your own voice. Because your energy is not a syllabus. It's a sentence, spoken once, in stillness, and then lived. So when the circle forms again, when they come back with the same script, same phrases, same innocent face, remember, just because they reset the scene doesn't mean you have to act in it. Let them repeat. Let them spin. You step out. You choose straight lines over emotional spirals. Because your clarity was not made to orbit their resistance. It was made to move forward. Some exits don't need explanations, just timing. That's the essence of the seventh Stoic boundary, the energetic exit. It's the unspoken art of leaving when your peace starts leaking, not in rage, not in dramatics, but in still, strategic silence. You've been there, mid-conversation, mid-call, mid-message. When something inside you starts tightening, the tone shifts, the energy dips, and suddenly you're no longer exchanging thoughts. You're absorbing noise. That's your signal, and the Stoic doesn't ignore it. They move. The energetic exit isn't about ghosting, it's about honoring. Honoring your clarity, honoring your nervous system, honoring the part of you that no longer wants to translate your boundaries into digestible dialogue. Because there's a moment, always a moment, when you realize this space is no longer mutual, it's extraction. You're being emotionally taxed to maintain a connection that feeds on your presence but never replenishes it. And when that moment comes, a Stoic doesn't fight to explain. They pivot to conserve. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But the energetic exit turns that idea on its head, because so many suffer in repetition more than reality. Staying in rooms you've already outgrown, answering messages that don't deserve your time, remaining emotionally available in places that thrive on your exhaustion. This boundary is your permission to stop doing that, not with cruelty, but with calm, not with announcement, but with absence. You don't owe closure to chaos. You don't owe comfort to energy that keeps shifting its weight onto you. And just because someone opens a loop doesn't mean you're required to close it. The energetic exit doesn't slam the door. It simply walks out before the air gets heavy. It's the decision to let silence carry the rest of the conversation. Because the most powerful reply is often a non-reply that leaves the emotional room intact, but empty. A Stoic doesn't stay in reactive rooms. They don't anchor in unpredictable tides. They build their clarity like architecture, structured, weight-bearing, and mobile. And when the vibration feels off, they don't analyze it. They honor it. The energetic exit is not escape, it's precision. It's choosing where your emotional presence belongs and when it no longer does. No dramatics, no delay, just distance. Strategic, elegant, untangled distance. Not every request deserves a rush, and not every message is a mandate. The eighth Stoic boundary reminds us of this simple truth, the time delay boundary. It's the deliberate space between stimulus and response, a sacred pause that reclaims your time from the tyranny of urgency. In a culture that equates fast replies with care, the one who slows down is often mislabeled as distant. But distance, in the Stoic mind, isn't disconnection, it's discernment. You've felt the pressure, the blinking cursor, the unanswered text, the expectation hanging in the air like a weight. Someone asks a question, sends a voice note, or posts a subtle dig meant just for you, and the timer starts, not theirs, yours, because now you're in the loop, and the world tells you, react quickly or risk being seen as cold, rude, disinterested. But the Stoic refuses that script, because what rush steals is not just time, it steals intention. The time delay boundary is not avoidance, it's architecture. It creates room for reason, for reflection, for response that isn't shaped by reactivity. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." But truth takes time, and wisdom doesn't live in haste. The people who demand your instant answers often do so not out of need, but out of habit, and every time you respond at their pace, you teach your nervous system to abandon its own. This boundary is quiet. You don't announce it. You embody it. You wait. You breathe. You process. And when you're ready, you reply, if a reply is even needed, because not every message deserves a mirror. Some are just noise dressed as urgency, and not every opportunity is aligned with your timing. You choose when to engage, not to prove that you care, but to protect the rhythm of your clarity. In the Stoic practice, restraint is not weakness, it's calibration. You are not here to feed emotional algorithms or meet invisible deadlines. You are here to live in rhythm with your reason, not the rush of someone else's impatience. So next time the notification pings, the question lands, the pressure builds, don't flinch. Delay, breathe, step back. Not as a power play, but as a return to your axis. Because peace isn't found in fast replies. It's found in intentional ones. Some conversations aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be walked away from. That's the ninth and final Stoic boundary. The last word is stillness. It's not a silence born from defeat, but from discernment. It's the calm after the truth has been spoken, the breath you take when you realize nothing more needs to be said. In a world addicted to rebuttals, follow-ups, and having the last word, this boundary is radical because it refuses the bait, it denies the loop, and it teaches you that sometimes the most powerful punctuation is your absence. You've been here before, you made your point, you spoke with care, and still they pushed, they twisted, they kept the argument alive like a fire that only needed one more log. And you felt it, the urge to re-explain, to clarify, to not leave things on a bad note. But what if the bad note isn't the silence? What if it's your need to be understood by someone who's committed to misunderstanding? That's where the Stoic draws the line, not in bitterness, but in balance, not in rage, but in restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, and the best closure is not to keep speaking until they agree. It's to know that you said what mattered, and then to stop." The last word is stillness reminds you that closure isn't mutual. Sometimes it's one-sided, and that's okay. You don't need their applause to validate your truth. You don't need their agreement to justify your clarity. Your peace is not on trial. Stillness isn't passive, it's selective. It's the choice to preserve energy instead of perform righteousness. It's choosing presence over performance, dignity over dominance. And yes, they might say you walked away, that you didn't care enough to keep talking. Let them, because in that stillness, you are not proving anything. You are protecting everything. And what you protect grows quieter, stronger, clearer, like water that runs deep. The last word is stillness is a closing door without a slam, a soft lock, a quiet decision that echoes louder than any argument could. You leave the room, not as a loser, not as a coward, but as a sovereign. And in doing so, you teach yourself a lesson more powerful than any verbal victory. Not every fire needs to be fought. Some just need to be left to burn out, without your breath. You didn't build these boundaries to become distant. You built them to return, back to yourself, back to the center, back to the place where your peace no longer negotiates for permission. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught that being available was love, that being accommodating was virtue, that shrinking your truth was maturity. But that was never peace. That was performance. That was the erosion of sovereignty dressed up as compassion. The Stoics never told us to disconnect from others. They taught us to detach from distortion. And these boundaries, they are not walls to push people away. They are gates to choose who gets to come close and who only gets to watch from a distance. You are not heartless for protecting your peace. You are not cold for slowing your replies. You are not cruel for exiting loops that never end. You are awake. You are discerning. You are finally listening to the space between stimulus and response. And that space is where your freedom lives. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And what lies outside your control more than the reactions of those who refuse to respect your limits? Let them misunderstand. Let them gossip. Let them call you guarded, aloof, difficult. They're not describing your truth. They're describing their discomfort with your clarity. And that discomfort is theirs to hold, not yours to fix. Stillness doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love cleaner, more precise, more aligned. Because love without boundaries becomes servitude, and peace without boundaries becomes performance. So now you don't explain, you don't defend, you don't debate, you embody. You walk softly, speak wisely, and conserve fiercely. Because you've learned that boundaries are not just what you protect, but what you protect yourself with. They are not reactions. They are philosophies in action. And when practiced, they don't harden you. They refine you. They don't separate you. They center you. And from that center, you radiate something far more powerful than noise: presence. If you've made it this far, then something in you already knows. Peace doesn't disappear. It's handed away piece by piece every time you say yes to what drains you and stay silent where a boundary should speak. So let me ask you something. Not as a performer, not as a follower of philosophy, but as a person standing at the edge of their own clarity. Which of these 9 boundaries have you already built? And which one are you still afraid to claim? This isn't a checklist, it's a mirror. And no one's watching but you. Maybe it's the pause you never took, the conversation you never left, the access you keep giving to people who spend it carelessly. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the part of you that keeps asking for permission to protect your own soul. But you don't need permission anymore. You need a pattern. You need a philosophy. You need to trust the version of you that no longer performs peace, but practices it. So speak once, delay when needed, exit when energy shifts, hold stillness when provoked. And if that makes you harder to reach, then good. You were never meant to be universally available. You were meant to be sovereign. And that sovereignty doesn't make you less compassionate, it makes your compassion intentional. In our next video, we'll go even deeper into the 7 silent habits Stoics use to guard their soul. Not walls, not weapons, but daily rituals that protect your inner quiet in a world that profits from your noise. If this video stirred something in you, share it with someone who's learning to stop over-explaining, someone who's tired of chasing peace instead of standing in it. And if you're ready to keep walking this path with us, subscribe, not out of habit, but as a decision. Because this channel isn't here to entertain you. It's here to remind you who you are when you stop being who they want you to be.